All right, ready to dive deep into the world of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Today we're going way beyond the father of the atomic bomb stuff, the headlines everybody knows.
Yeah, we're going to try to uncover the man behind the myth, right?
Yeah.
Because Oppenheimer, he was a lot more than just a brilliant physicist.
For sure,
This
yeah.
guy was dealing with some really heavy ethical dilemmas, personal struggles, and his legacy, it still shapes the world today. So
It's kind of hard to picture, you know what I mean? This is a guy who grew up surrounded by, Picasso's,
Right.
Van Goghs,
Yeah.
wealthy family, an early interest in science. I read he got a mineral kit as a kid, and, that sparked his interest.
Yeah.
Not really your typical image of, a tortured genius.
It's interesting, though, because even when you look back at his youth, you can kind of see these two sides, right?
Yeah.
So he gets this science-focused gift, but then he goes to the ethical culture school.
Huh, interesting.
Talk about an early lesson in balancing intellectual curiosity with moral responsibility.
Right.
From day one.
And you can't deny the guy was brilliant, right?
Absolutely.
Graduating from Harvard summa cum laude in just 3 years, then off to Cambridge.
Yeah.
It's like he was on a rocket ship.
Yeah.
But some of what we've read, it seems like he was maybe a little intense, a little too much,
Absolutely. And think about this, right? Oppenheimer, he was always surrounded by, the best minds of his time.
Yeah.
Ernest Rutherford, J.J. Thompson, Max Born.
Oh, wow, yeah.
All future Nobel Prize winners, right?
Crazy.
And it's not like they were just acquaintances.
Right.
This was his world. This was his everyday life.
You got to wonder, right?
Yeah.
Being in that kind of environment, it must have been incredibly stimulating, but also incredibly high pressure, right?
Yeah.
Could that have been, part of what led to some of the, let's say darker aspects of his personality?
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. Some people think that all that pressure to achieve, to live up to what everyone expected of him, it might have contributed to his struggles with mental health and even some of his actions, the poisoned apple incident with his mentor,
Right.
Patrick Blackett.
Yeah, wow. Trying to poison your mentor.
Yeah.
That's pretty extreme. Even for a stretched out physics student,
Yeah.
it definitely makes you think something was going on there, right?
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece of the puzzle for sure. And it shows us that, despite all his brilliance, Oppenheimer was still human.
Yeah.
Capable of making some pretty questionable decisions.
For sure.
To say the least.
Okay, well, let's maybe change gears a bit, yeah. Let's talk about Oppenheimer's actual work.
Okay.
'Cause we all tend to get hung up on the atomic bomb,
Right.
But he wasn't a one-hit wonder.
Right.
This guy made groundbreaking contributions across a huge range of physics.
Yeah, you're totally right. The atomic bomb kind of overshadows everything else he did. But his scientific legacy, it's huge and it matters. Even today, take the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, for instance. It's essential in quantum chemistry.
Right.
Because it helps us understand how molecules behave. Imagine trying to understand, this super complex dance routine.
Okay.
The Born-Oppenheimer approximate, it lets us simplify all the steps so we can understand how the atoms within a molecule are actually moving.
Okay, so even for someone like me who, barely scraped by in high school chemistry, I'm starting to get that he was already a big deal in physics.
Oh, yeah.
Way before the Manhattan Project ever came
Yeah.
along.
For sure.
What else did he do?
Oh, man, tons of stuff. He predicted the existence of positrons, described quantum tunneling, worked on the first calculations of the hydrogen atom's energy levels.
Wait, hold on. Quantum tunneling. What is that?
So imagine you've got a particle, right? And it's trapped inside a box.
Okay.
Classical physics, it says that particle needs enough energy to break through the walls of the box to escape, right?
Yeah.
But in the quantum world, there's this chance that the particle can actually tunnel right through the walls, even without enough energy.
No way.
Yeah. And Oppenheimer, he was one of the key people who helped describe this phenomenon. It's bizarre,
Yeah.
but it's real.
That's wild.
It is.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this guy was considered such a giant in physics,
Yeah.
But here's what really gets me. How does someone who's obsessed with these, super abstract concepts like particles tunneling through walls,
Yeah.
how do they end up creating something as devastating as the atomic bomb?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And it leads us to one of the most interesting parts of Oppenheimer's story. His shift from being pretty much apolitical to being deeply involved in left-wing politics and activism.
Oh, yeah, I read about that he didn't even vote until like 1936 or something.
Right. Yeah.
But then something changed. Like, what happened?
Well, the rise of fascism in Europe was a big turning point for Oppenheimer.
Oh.
He was really affected by what was happening to Jewish scientists,
Yeah.
many of whom he knew personally.
Wow.
And so he helped them escape Nazi Germany.
Right.
And he started advocating for social reforms.
Yeah.
And this period, it was like it awakened this social conscience in him.
Right.
And he got more and more involved in, left-leaning circles.
So he went from being this like detached intellectual
Yeah.
to someone who was actually engaged in like all the political craziness of the time.
Exactly, yeah. And you have to understand that newfound political awareness,
Yep.
it's crucial for understanding how he ended up leading the Manhattan Project.
Okay.
It also sets the stage for some of the most controversial parts of his life.
Oh, man. Okay, wait, hold on. So how do we get from potentially communist sympathizer
Right.
to leading the development of like the most powerful weapon the world had ever seen?
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be where we're going next, right?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, it really is amazing, how Oppenheimer's political leanings kind of played into him leading the Manhattan Project. Like, sure, his expertise in theoretical physics, that was definitely essential. But it was also his ability to, like, bring people together, inspire some of the greatest minds of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's really what made him, I guess, the perfect choice.
Right.
Well, maybe perfect's not the right word. Controversial, for sure.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Definitely. And it wasn't just like the scientific leadership, right?
Yeah.
Oppenheimer, he was also really involved in choosing where they would test the bomb.
Right.
And he picked Los Alamos, New Mexico,
Yeah.
which, from what I read, was a place that meant a lot to him personally, like from when he was younger.
Yeah, that connection he had with the New Mexico landscape, it adds a whole other layer to his story,
Right.
It wasn't just some random spot for him. It was
Yeah.
a place he felt connected to,
Right.
which makes what he did there, well, it makes it even more intense,
Yeah. So we've got this complex, brilliant, kind of troubled guy
Yeah.
leading the charge to create the atomic bomb
Uh-huh.
in a place that's like super personal to him.
It is.
Talk about like a recipe for drama.
Right. It's almost like something out of Shakespeare or something, isn't it?
Totally. And all of this leads up to that one moment, the Trinity test, July 16th, 1945.
Right.
The first atomic bomb detonation.
The first one ever.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like to see that.
It must have been unbelievable.
I mean, the sources we read, they describe like a blinding flash, a mushroom cloud like 12 kilometers high.
Yeah.
And this heat so intense that it melted sand into glass.
Wow.
I mean, just crazy, right?
Yeah, the scale of the explosion, it's really hard to even wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And Oppenheimer himself, when he was thinking back on that moment,
Mm-hmm.
he famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Yeah.
I mean, it's a chilling statement for sure.
It is. It is. And it really shows you the impact that test had on him.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting that he turned to like Hindu scripture at that moment. You know?
Yeah.
We know that he was into Eastern philosophy and mysticism, right?
Right.
He even learned Sanskrit so he could read the Bhagavad Gita like in the original language.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, do you think that, that fascination he had with Eastern thought, that it maybe shaped how he reacted to the bomb?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
It does seem like Oppenheimer was like looking for answers beyond science,
Yeah.
I mean, his interest in Eastern philosophy, it makes you think he was exploring like human existence,
Yeah.
morality, the consequences of our actions.
Right. So he wasn't just like this cold, calculating scientist.
Right.
He was
Yeah.
wrestling with these really big philosophical questions.
Yeah, it seems like he was.
I mean, that makes his like transformation after Trinity even more interesting,
It
right?
does.
He goes from celebrating that the gadget worked to like almost immediately advocating that we shouldn't make more of these things.
Yeah, that's right.
Nuclear non-proliferation.
Yeah, I mean, he recognized the power of what he had helped to create,
Yeah.
and he started pushing for international control of atomic energy.
It's like just weeks earlier, he was like the guy leading the charge to build the bomb.
Uh-huh.
And now he's desperately trying to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, exactly, trying to undo what he had done.
It's like such a dramatic change.
It is. But you have to remember, this was also like the peak of the Cold War
Right.
and all that stuff about Oppenheimer and his left-leaning politics.
Yeah.
Well, it came back to bite him.
Oh, man.
The FBI had always been kind of suspicious of Oppenheimer's political affiliations.
Oh.
And in the Cold War, I mean, everybody was paranoid back then.
Yeah, yeah.
Those suspicions, they turned into accusations.
Wow.
People were saying he was a Soviet spy. They questioned his loyalty to the U.S.
That must have been just crushing for him.
It must have been. He went from being this national hero to being treated like an enemy.
Wow.
It was a complete fall from grace. He had to go through these really intense security hearings.
Yeah.
And they ended up taking away his security clearance.
It's really tragic, you know. But something that stood out to me in what we read was the role of Edward Teller,
Yeah.
Oppenheimer's colleague from the Manhattan Project.
Right, right.
And Teller, he was a big part of developing the hydrogen bomb, right?
Yeah, he was.
Which is even more powerful.
Right.
But he actually testified against Oppenheimer
He did.
during the hearings.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Can you talk about that a little?
Sure. I mean, Teller's testimony, it really hurt Oppenheimer's reputation.
It did.
Sure, they had this professional rivalry,
Right.
but some people think that maybe Teller was trying to get more funding for his hydrogen bomb project,
Oh, wow.
you know, by taking Oppenheimer down.
It's like, even at the highest levels of science, personal stuff and politics get in the way.
Yeah, that's true. Scientific progress is never just about pursuing knowledge, right?
Right.
There's always power, ambition involved, and, you know, sometimes betrayal.
Yeah. But Oppenheimer still had people on his side, even with all this going on.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Like, didn't Albert Einstein defend him?
Yeah, Einstein and a bunch of other well-known scientists, they knew that the attacks on Oppenheimer, they were political.
Yeah.
They saw it as an attempt to silence him
Right.
because he was speaking out against the government's push for more powerful weapons.
It's amazing that even though the government basically turned on him,
Yeah.
he still had the respect of all these other scientists.
He did.
I mean, that says a lot about the impact he had.
It does. Oppenheimer's story, it's complicated. I mean, he was brilliant, flawed. He contributed so much to science, but he also struggled with the ethics of what he did.
Right.
And his struggles, they're still relevant today, I think. Like, think about how technology is changing so fast.
Yeah.
The ethical dilemmas we face are getting more and more complex.
Totally. It's mind-boggling.
It is.
I mean, artificial intelligence is getting so advanced.
It is.
We're on the verge of being able
Indeed.
to, like, actually manipulate life with genetic engineering.
Right.
It's amazing, the potential benefits, but the risks are huge.
They are, and that's exactly why Oppenheimer's story matters so much, you know?
Yeah.
His life, his work, it makes us ask ourselves some really tough questions.
They do.
Like, who controls these powerful technologies?
Right.
Who's responsible for making sure they're used for good?
Yeah.
How do we as a society figure out how to deal with all of this?
Those are some big questions. I guess that's what we're really left with after this deep dive into J. Robert Oppenheimer, right?
Things like it.
It's been like this crazy mix of genius, betrayal, triumph, tragedy.
It has been. Yeah.
It's a story that definitely gives you a lot to think about.
A lot to think about.
So what are your final thoughts? What about Oppenheimer's legacy? It's hard to, like, sum it all up neatly, you know? Oppenheimer's life, it was just this incredible mix of scientific achievement, political turmoil, and personal struggle. It's like he was always, like, wrestling with these huge, you know, existential questions.
Yeah.
Even while he was, like, changing the course of history.
Yeah, and that wrestling, that internal conflict, that's what makes his legacy so interesting, I think.
Right.
He wasn't just a brilliant physicist.
Right.
He was also thinking deeply about, like, the morality of what he was doing.
Yeah, I keep thinking back to that quote of his, you know, the one from the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, yeah.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Yeah, it's chilling.
It's chilling, but it also shows you how much responsibility he felt. Almost like guilt, I guess.
Yeah.
For unleashing something so destructive.
Exactly. And you see that sense of responsibility in what he did after the war.
Yeah.
He really pushed for nuclear nonproliferation. He wanted international control of atomic energy. Right. He even went against, like, his own interests, risked his career by opposing the hydrogen bomb.
It's like he was trying to make up for what he did, you know?
Yeah, it does seem that way.
But it's also interesting to consider how, you know, his upbringing, seeing all that art and philosophy,
Right.
maybe that influenced his sense of right and wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Oppenheimer wasn't just shaped by his science background, right?
Right.
It was the whole intellectual and cultural world he grew up in.
Right, right.
And that range of knowledge, those different perspectives, that's what made him such a complex and interesting person.
It really makes you wonder, right?
It does.
It's like, what if he hadn't had that kind of education? What if he hadn't been exposed to all those different ways of thinking?
Yeah.
Would you have reacted differently to everything that happened?
It's hard to know for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think that his broad intellectual background, it definitely played a big part in how he saw the world and how he dealt with things.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and legacy of J. Robert Oppenheimer,
Yeah.
what's the one big takeaway for you?
Mhm.
What's the main thing you want listeners to remember about him?
I think it's that we have to be aware of the ethics of what we're doing,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to science and technology.
Right.
Oppenheimer's story, it's a reminder that scientific progress without ethics can have really terrible consequences.
That's a powerful message,
Hmm.
and it feels especially relevant now.
I agree.
I mean, the technology we had is advancing so fast,
It is.
and we're facing some serious ethical questions, right? Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering.
Yeah.
We have the power to, change life itself.
Right.
These are tools that could have a huge impact on humanity, good or bad.
Absolutely. And Oppenheimer's story is both like a warning and an inspiration, I think.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even when things are really challenging, we have a responsibility to talk to each other, think about the consequences of what we do,
Right.
and try to create a future where scientific progress benefits everyone.
It's a lot to take in, but I think that's what's so great about these deep dives, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It's not about, skimming the surface.
Yeah.
We're really going deep into a topic.
Yeah,
And a lot of times, we end up with more questions than answers,
that's true.
but I think that's the point.
I think you're right.
So, to everyone listening out there, we hope this deep dive into J. Robert Oppenheimer's world has, challenged what you thought you knew, maybe taught you some new things,
Right.
and hopefully even inspired you to learn more.
Yeah, and more than anything, we hope it's made you think about the ethical challenges we all face today.
Because the choices we make now, they're going to shape the world of tomorrow.
Absolutely, they will.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
It's been a pleasure.